Tales from the streets.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Another episode of Street Tales. I've got my friend Mo on the line, and I met Mo when I was with Hillsborough County. She had been well into her law enforcement career. I was still relatively new. Me and my buddy BJ, who was on a previous episode, were working in an area we call the Fifth Bowl, and we met Mo, and it was probably one of the greatest years of law enforcement in my life, and we learned a lot. She helped guide us through not just law enforcement, but also the inner workings of the sheriff's department and kind of some of the hurdles that you might have to overcome as you progress in your law enforcement career. We're going to be talking about just kind of her early life, what got her into law enforcement, her early career. Mo was an undercover detective for a while. She was a trainer. She just had a very vast knowledge base and experience within law enforcement. And I'm very thankful for your time, Mo, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm looking forward to it for a while. So, Mo, kicking it to you, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tyler, for having me. I've been super excited about doing this since Tyler told me that this was something he was getting involved in and asked if I would be part of it. I have thought about all the different things that we could talk about, all the different experiences that we had. And like he said, we had a great time when we were out there at the sheriff's office together. And so this is really exciting. So again, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
To tell a little bit about myself, I grew up in Hillsborough County, Tampa. That was where I was born and raised. My parents moved there, kind of going back a little bit. Back in the 80s, they moved into an area called Town and Country, which was a pretty affluent back in the day. By the time we became cops, it really wasn't anymore, but it was an affluent area. And I had an interesting upbringing because mom and dad, married. They're still married to this day. So I had a 2-parent household, but when they moved us in the neighborhood, their goal was to move us into a good area so that their kids could be raised in a great, in good schools, et cetera, et cetera. And with that being said, we moved into a neighborhood and there were only 3 black families in the entire neighborhood. Everybody else was white, not even Hispanic. It was just all white. So a little bit of a different upbringing in that respect, because people look and they think, oh, the 80s, really not a lot was going on, but there was still a lot of, I would tell you, we were definitely viewed as different. When we went to school, we had people who would say things like, can I touch your hair? Because they hadn't been around black people. There were people that were still not doing a full on, like, burning crosses in people's yard, but definitely putting out things that would be racially charged to make sure that the 3 families that were there knew they weren't that welcome. So my background was like that, growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, going to predominantly white schools, and being being a great bit of the minority at that point throughout my whole life. With that, I know that my dad, because again, there were so few black people in the neighborhood. My dad was a longshoreman, so he worked very hard and he worked out a lot and he would run and do things like that. So he had interactions with law enforcement because he would be out working out or exercising and being stopped by cops because he seemed like he didn't belong there. Just to kind of give you that kind of background with me. But overall, I will say I had a great childhood. I didn't have any issues. My parents, like I said, still married to this day. They worked very hard to try to make sure we did get everything we needed and some of what we wanted. I would categorize us as a little bit spoiled, but not too crazy. I went to local high school, and where I kind of laughed when I was listening to y'all's episodes. I was kind of the nerd. I didn't get a letter for sports. I academically lettered when I left high school. So that's how I got my Letterman jacket, because of my GPA.
There you go.
I was applying to go out of state, but then my parents, they did, what they could do to take care of us, but they didn't have a lot of extra money. So college was an extra expense that we had to figure out, which meant a lot of loans and a lot of, trying to get grants and scholarships and things like that. Because when you get into the academic side of lettering, while it's great, you don't necessarily have as much access to all the scholarships. You've got to be like the top 1% a lot of times to get scholarships for those kinds of things. So I ended up settling on going to University of South Florida, which is a local college here. At the time, it wasn't like it is now. It was a very much a commuter college. People went to USF, mostly stayed here locally. So it was a great school, but it wasn't like, like it wasn't like FSU or Florida or any of those schools where you had like the big football teams and things like that. They didn't get a football team until many years after I left.
Yeah.
But left straight out of high school, went into the 4-year college. I actually went to school originally under a pre-med major because I wanted to be a doctor, and did 3 years at USF working towards that degree. And I hated every minute of it. It wasn't like the end result I was excited about, but I hated the chemistries and the biochems. There was nothing about it that interested me. So I actually took a year off USF. And during that year, I've always been, like I said, a bit of a nerd. So I liked school. And while I was off on that year, I still took classes over at HCC. And one of the classes that I took was Intro to Corrections. And it was taught by, at the time, a lieutenant with Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. And he said to his class, hey, if any of you guys are interested in doing a ride along, I'd be able to facilitate you doing a ride along with my squad if you'd like to do it. And back in the day, I was thinking, this is going to be awesome. It's like cops, but I get to like ride in the car. It's real life. Because cops, I'm dating myself a little bit, but cops was the big show back then. We didn't have live PD and all the stuff they have nowadays. So I said, I would love to do it. And I literally did a ride along in his class because, one, I took his class because I thought it would be an easy A. And two, I thought it would be like cops. I thought it would be fun. So I did the ride along, and that I did a midnight ride along, midnight shift. I was exhausted, but I remember getting out of the car that night and thinking, this is it. This is what I want to do. At the time, I was not only going to school, but I was working a full-time job over at Capital One. I was an account supervisor there. And I might have been just a customer service rep. Either way, I was working for Capital One at the time at this point. And I remember getting out thinking, this is what I want to do. This is not, I don't want to sit in an office for the rest of my life. And so I started really like rolling it around in my head and doing a little like background on it and thinking like this isn't a job that you can just do on a whim, because you had a good. And what dawned on me at that point is, again, I reverted back to what I knew that my dad had experienced.
So Mo, you were talking about your family growing up and their interactions that they had with law enforcement and kind of how that jumped into your head when you were doing ride-alongs.
Yeah, I was, after doing the ride along, like I said, I really thought this is a job I think I'd like to do, but I knew this was not something you can just jump in lightly to be a cop. So I really did some soul searching and thought about like what would be my purpose? Because, and this gets into a little bit of my philosophy when it comes to being a cop. I feel like the thing when I'm, I'll talk about this when I instruct people, I always tell them it has to be more than I just want to help people, because that will go away, because you'll get tired of quote unquote helping people because you realize that sometimes you don't help people in this job. So you got to have a purpose that's a little bit more than that. I didn't know that. I didn't have that philosophy when I first did this, but it's something that has evolved over time. However, I knew in the beginning this wasn't something that I could take lightly and jump into. So I started kind of looking and doing some soul searching, and it came back to kind of the forefront of my mind, some of the interactions that my father had when he would just be out jogging in our neighborhood and cops would stop him and say he didn't belong in that area and do things that bordered on like, this isn't right. It wasn't bordering. It wasn't right. That's the reality. It just simply wasn't right. And then just interactions. I have, uncles and different people who had interactions with law enforcement. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, let me think about the interactions I have had with law enforcement. And I didn't recall seeing a lot of them that looked like me. So, and to give you some background, at the time, I had I had dreadlocks that were probably down about waist deep at the time. And so I was like, what better way for people to look at law enforcement a little bit different if in that first look, that person looked different than what they were used to seeing? The other thing I really did some evaluation is if you don't like how things are, you cannot sit on your porch and gripe about it and say, oh, yeah, things should be different. They should do this. They should do that. If you don't have a seat at the table or you're unwilling to take a seat at the table. So when I thought about it, I thought if I wanted something to be different about law enforcement, then I had to be part of law enforcement. That's never been something, I will say, in my culture that a lot of people encourage their children to do. It's very commonly encouraged. Let me put it that way. There are some, but it's not a common encouragement where people say, hey, you should be a cop when it comes to my culture. So, and in my family, I was and still am the only cop that has ever been in my family, ever. So I thought to myself, I enjoyed the job. Well, I won't say the job because I didn't know at this point, but I enjoyed the ride along immensely. And then when I tacked on these other core principles, I thought, yeah, this is what I need to do. So I did a couple more ride alongs. I didn't just, jump right in at that point. I got with the lieutenant at the time and I said, hey, can I do a few more ride alongs? And this is why. And he was very supportive. He let me ride along with his squad, I think a total of like 4 or 5 times. And I was like, yep, I'm doing it. So now I had to break the news to my mom that I wasn't going to go back to school and be a doctor and I was going to be a cop.
Yeah.
It was rough. It was a rough road at first because again, it's not something culturally in our family that was like, yeah, I definitely want you to be a cop. A doctor was much more on her radar than being a cop.
Mm-hmm.
However, I ended up going into the academy. I completed the academy. She watched how hard I worked because at the time, again, I was working for Capital One and I was working full time at Capital One. I went to the academy full time and because I did not want to spend a year working towards this goal. So I buckled down and at the time it was about 4.5 months. I'd go to the academy from 8 to 5. I would work from 6 to midnight every day. And then on Saturday, I'd work a 10-hour shift to make up all my hours because I couldn't afford not to do it that way.
So I'm going to jump in. So this just shows you the difference in the academy time. Because when I went to the academy, it was basically a full-time job and you got paid to go through the academy. So you're saying when you went, did you have to pay to go to the academy or did they still cover that part for you?
No, I had to pay to go to the academy. I had to buy all of the equipment that was only useful if I became a cop. And I had no job waiting for me when I finished.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that is why I could not afford to give up my job at Capital One because not only did I need to work through the academy that 4.5 months, but I needed to make sure that I had money to pay bills until I got a job. Yeah. And it took me a year to get hired after I completed the academy.
Oh, really? And
so
was Hillsborough your first? I mean, was it the only one you applied to or did you apply to other ones?
Oh, no, I applied a lot of different places. Hillsborough was my first choice and I will tell you why. When I said that my family had run-ins with law enforcement that weren't always that positive, my family had always commented that most of the time the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office acted in a very distinguished manner when you compared it to some of the other local agencies that they had to deal with. Yeah. Typically, if Hillsborough came after you, it was because you really did something, and they weren't going to treat you like a jerk. So that was why Hillsborough was kind of my first choice because I felt like they were already ahead where I thought we should be as a law enforcement community. And I thought it would be nice to help continue that path to get better. Because like I said, I wanted to make a difference in the respect of how law enforcement policed, how people interpreted law enforcement policing, that kind of things. So
gotcha.
That's what it was, but no, that was not my only application. I applied at St. Pete, which was, back at the time I applied, St. Pete did not have a great reputation, but I thought again, I could make a difference there. I applied at Plant City Police Department. I applied at TPD, Tampa Police Department. I applied at, I'm trying to remember because it was I'm not going to tell you when because it's a long time ago. But I applied at probably like 8 or 10 different ones and I kind of stopped there because I didn't want it to seem like I was just shotgun blasting. But I got offers from St. Pete. I got offers from Plant City. And I got offered from Hillsborough. And later on, some of the others called, but I had already accepted the job at Hillsborough. So
got it. And so when you started with Hillsborough, did you still have to go through FTO? Because that, again, when I went through, we went straight from the academy, then we went straight into FTO.
Yes.
Okay.
We still had that. Even though it had been a year since my training, we did I don't know what they call it now, but we were in the classroom for about a month. And then after the month-long training in the classroom, then you rolled out to the street and we did 4 months of FTO training. When I was going through, and I don't know if they still allow it, you were permitted to be accelerated. So I didn't do the full 4 months. I was accelerated because I was taking this super seriously. This to me was a career. It was not just something I was going to do for a little bit. So I really did like that time when I was told that that term. And even subsequently, I've always taken this job very seriously because of the impact that it had. But yeah, that's what kind of led me to the sheriff's office. I completed the academy, and after completing, that hard work, like I said, my mom, you saw how hard I was working. I want to go back to that because there was one important part in there that
So Mo, you were talking about the work you were putting in during the academy and how your mom noticed the amount of work you had, but you said your dad had some reservations about the change in career path.
correct. And I understood his reservations too because of his interactions with law enforcement. I understood that.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time I completed the academy and I explained to him the whys and he saw again the work I was putting in, when I actually got hired on at the sheriff's office, my dad actually pinned my badge for me.
Oh.
So super important to me. And that was a big deal. It's a small thing, but it was a really big deal because I think that was when I really started to see like, yes, this is where I'm going to make a difference because now I think my dad saw somebody that he looked at that looked like him, first of all, that he thought they're going to be different than the other cops that I've had to deal with. So fast forward, like I said, I finished the academy. It took me a year to get hired on. Quite literally, I think back then, there were very few, well, not just back then, I think now too, but more so then, there were very few females. There were definitely very few Black females that were in the academy. And with that being said, I think it was a numbers game a lot of times that, well, we already have this many females in the class, so we're not going to put her in this class because it was definitely, these agencies would express interest, but it was like, oh, we don't want to put you in this class just yet. So lo and behold, I landed at the sheriff's office and started my career there. And I will tell you from the day I started to the day I left, I always loved what I did. I always loved my job, that part of it. Did I love some of the politics and some of the things that happened in the background? No, but I definitely always loved what I did and stood by what I did. And I encourage people to go into this job and do it with a level of excellence because it is a really good job and it's afforded me a lot of opportunities out of life to be able to do some of the things subsequently. Mm-hmm. So I started out on the road. I worked the road for a while. I became a field training officer, like you said. That's where I got my first dipped my feet in the pool of training and started realizing I really did like teaching people how to do this job as safe as possible and what is fundamentally something that is the fundamentals of what's going to make you a good cop. Because I think sometimes it's misconstrued that you got to be able to shoot, you got to be able to this, you got to be able to that. But I will tell you the first and foremost fundamental thing you have to know how to do in this job is communicate. You have got to be able to talk to people because if you cannot talk to people, your career is going to be long and arduous. That's the reality.
Yes, it is.
It's whether it's going to be living in fights all the time or in internal affairs, it's going to be tough,
Yeah, and I will say that is something that you learn pretty quickly is that you have to have the ability to talk to people and you have to have the confidence that you know what you're talking about. And that was one of my early supervisors, Shiro, who's still there, but he would constantly teach us and explain to us, this is a profession. You need to be confident on what you're investigating, confident in the law, which gives you confidence when you're speaking to someone, whether it's a suspect or a victim, and that will help you know what you can do. I think a lot of cops and people in law enforcement that you see get put in these weird situations, you see them, they're kind of unsure as to what they're doing. And that gives the potential suspect, basically, they can read that on you. It's an interesting thing that I don't think that gets talked about enough. But before we get back into training, what was your early career like? Like, where were you patrolling and like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah. So I started out, they called us the Gucci district because I started out in District 3. Mm-hmm. So we were in an area that was considered a little more affluent than some of the other areas. So we did have some very, very expensive neighborhoods and homes in our areas, but then we also had some not so great areas and gangs and all the things that you get everywhere else. And what I learned from there is that you can be a cop anywhere. It's just a matter of learning how to be a cop depending on the area that you're in. So I started out there and I worked our area that was deemed like Carrollwood area. It wasn't the worst, but it wasn't the best either. My area specifically bordered up to our next district over, which was District 1, which at the time was probably our worst district. So I had a good mix of good and bad. Because they would run over from District 1 right into my zone. So it was always a lot of fun. I had an amazing squad my first year. Well, my first few years, because I stayed with that squad forever. We had a great mix of people some who had experience, some who were brand new like me, and we all seemed to just mesh really well. The more experienced people were the ones that they mentored us. It was really something that I don't even know if they did it on purpose or if it was something that they were mentally thinking that they were doing, or if it was just something that was secondary and that was just natural to them, because they mentored us to be better cops and subsequently learn how to talk to people and learn when to, for lack of better terms, when to hold them and when to fold them, and when you're going to need to talk to people and when you're going to need to fight people, So it was a really ground for me to grow in when I first got out there. It gave me a lot of confidence in my job. It forced me to learn a lot of things because the area that I worked, you had that mix of affluent people. So you deal with a little bit of a different call versus the person that's homeless. The calls are different. The treatment should not be different. I will definitely say that.
Absolutely.
So I did that for about, like I said, I did that. I was on that squad for the first 4 or 5 years of my career, roughly speaking. Then I went to become I was a field training officer. I actually became a field training officer pretty quickly. And for a while, I was the only midnight FTO and the only female training officer we had in our district at the time.
Got it.
So it was interesting, and it was a lot because that meant they tried to cycle every new officer into my car because I was the only one that was working midnight. And there's a definite distinct difference in how you patrol in the daytime versus how you do it at night.
Yes.
It's important that they learn that. So I had a lot of trainees, and if you are not well versed in your job, try teaching what it is that you do, and it'll bring you up to speed quick.
Real quick.
Yeah. So,
real quick.
I obviously had to be on my game because these people are coming out and they're asking you questions. You're like, huh, that's a good one. So I don't think a trainer has to know every answer, but you better know where to find the answer. And that's what I learned very quickly, to do those kinds of things, so that I was sending these individuals that I trained out with the best, they had the best and most filled toolbox I could give them at that time.
No, absolutely.
So we ended up going from being midnights. Eventually, they compiled all of our FTOs into a training squad, and we all worked evening shift. So I did that for a little while as a FTO, again, working an evening shift. It gave us the ability to train them on day shift stuff and night shift stuff, and be able to collectively have one supervisor they were reporting to. It was just kind of in my opinion, it really was a better system to handle training through. After doing that for a little bit, I ended up going to a crime prevention unit. And for those of you who don't know, I think they've changed the name now. It's not called crime prevention anymore. But basically, we were the party planners for the sheriff's office, I always said. We planned all the parades. We planned all of the award ceremonies. We planned all of any type of recognition for the deputies, any type of things where we were going out and speaking with the community, doing a lot of community engagement type stuff. And people laughed at us because they didn't necessarily see the usefulness of a crime prevention unit. But as someone who's been in that unit and worked on the street and done all these things, building those bridges with the community prior to the point when you need them are incredibly important.
Yeah.
The agencies that take the time to go out and meet the community in positive lights, when it comes time when there is that shooting, when it comes time when there's that something that happens where the community wants to question you as an agency, if you have not established a relationship with them prior to, it usually does not fare very well. So that's where I saw the usefulness in what I was doing there, along with the fact that at the time the sheriff held seats on lots of different boards throughout the community, but obviously he's one person and can't attend every single meeting. So there were many cases where we would represent the sheriff at different boards and things like that. So I got to sit on different urban leagues and different types of community boards and have a more intimate detail of what these people's concerns were what they liked that law enforcement did, what they didn't like that law enforcement did, because I became just part of the board. So they didn't hold their tongues really. They were speaking pretty freely at that point.
Yeah, and I'll interject. So you brought up
Sure.
a couple things. I'm just going to recap, but because it ties into the next part, what you're talking about. You talked about there's different ways of law enforcement during the day and at night. And having been trained on nights and work mostly midnights, you deal with a lot of in progress calls for service, things like that, like robberies, domestics, whatever it is that are just occurring. You also deal with a lot more drunks, things of that nature. So you get a wide array of calls. Daytime is usually delayed, but you also end up working a lot more with detectives, things like that. So you kind of be able, you usually have the time to progress a case during the day shift. So, and especially when I left, usually the senior, well, not always, but most of the senior deputies would want day shift for personal reasons, personal life, regular sleep schedule, but also they're kind of progressing their career along.
Right.
And I love that I didn't even know you worked for the community services. And that's something that's been a hot topic in law enforcement. There's no, in my opinion, there's no one way to interact and engage with a community. I think that they're all necessary. I know a lot of things have been tried. It's not always just go, 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 get all the bad guys, get them off the street. You need to be able to engage with people who live there because it also develops that relationship where they feel comfortable talking to you. So it's not just, I hate cops because they pulled me over or they arrested my cousin or whatever. It's like, no, these things happen, but like, I like Mo, I like Tyler. I know who they are. I've talked to them. I've sat in meetings. They listen to me. It'll also open up paths of like, hey, these are some crime trends or some things that we're seeing in our area that they may not have just offered up to you, or you might not even be aware. So I love that you brought that up, but I cut you off a little bit. I just kind of wanted to tie that into what you're talking about, sitting on the board and talking with the community. So please continue.
Yeah, you're not, don't worry about cutting me off. I think it's good that you share your side of it too, because the thing too is when I was in crime prevention, another thing that I thought we did that was amazing is we would go out to the schools and we were all assigned a certain number of schools and we would teach all of the crime prevention programs that came from a real deputy sheriff that walked into the building and they saw in uniform and was a person. It wasn't just a uniform, because that's where we get sometimes watered down to, is we're a uniform. We're a representation of something. We would go out to these schools. We would teach in kindergarten. We would teach them officer friendly. We would teach pedestrian safety. We would teach bicycle safety. We did a drug awareness program with the fourth graders. In fifth grade, we did a whole junior deputy program that we would put these kids through. And they would go, we would see them for maybe 4 or 5 sessions and then would give them their junior deputy badge. And while it seems very like, those are like, oh, these are just silly programs, and kids have outgrown those kind of things nowadays. They didn't outgrow, and I still don't think they have, is that connection. That cop became something that they knew. Oh, you mean, and I always made it a point that I would introduce myself as Deputy Mo instead of, at the time I was Deputy Devage, and when I left I was Deputy Greco, but I would say I'm Deputy Mo. So I became a person to them, not just that uniform. And I already laid the foundation before they became a teenager, before they became someone who had that bad interaction. I had already at least made them have one good interaction with law enforcement.
No, absolutely. BJ even talks about that one of the school resource officers that he had connections with kind of motivated him and made him interested in law enforcement. And then on the opposite side of that, previous people that I've talked to, again, even though they necessarily didn't go into law enforcement, they chose a different path. They remember those interactions with cops, people on law enforcement side that engage with them as a human being. So, that's huge. And I still, to this day, still try to go talk to schools and put myself out there, because a lot of kids, like you said, a lot of kids have never met a law enforcement officer in a controlled, safe environment, not in uniform, whatever, just there to talk to you, let alone a federal agent or whatever. So it's interesting, the questions that pop up and in the stuff that they learn from like their family or their friends or whatever they watch on TV. And it's like, no, that's not a normal occurrence.
It's not. It's such a low, it's the 1% portion that people hear and see when it comes to law enforcement. And they think that is in 100% on a whole. So, I don't know. And I'll tell you a little quick story, it won't take long. But when I was doing those, going out to schools, I used to have a lot of the considered not as great schools. They were not, they weren't high on the socioeconomic scale. I will tell you that is what it was. Mm-hmm. But the kids are kids. It was funny because I had like 2 really affluent schools, and then I had several that were not so affluent. And kids were kids, whether I was in the affluent school or the regular, in one of the ones that were not so affluent. It was that they all had a curiosity about law enforcement. They all had a curiosity about me as a person. And like I told you, when I started law enforcement, I had dreadlocks that came down to my waist. And I used to wear them in this big, huge, giant bun. And one of my schools I was at, the kids were, first of all, they were astonished when I walked in. They were like, oh my gosh. They flat said she's black. And then several of them were like, she has dreads. And they were so astonished by that. And I remember there was one kid that was struggling in school, and he's like, I want to see your dreads down. And I was like, I'll tell you what. I said, if for the remainder of the year that I am coming here, that your teacher tells me that you're acting appropriately, you're doing well in school, I will come in one day and I'll eat lunch with you with my dreads down. And I said, and that way you can get a chance to see them. Now, I will tell you, sidebar, that was outside of our uniform code. We weren't supposed to do that. But I thought, to me, that would have been something that was going to stick with that kid, because people don't always remember all the details of what happens with a situation, but they will remember how you made them feel. And for whatever reason, that was something that I think made him feel special, that I was doing that for him. So lo and behold, he did it. He did what he was supposed to do. His teachers were like, you have made a huge impact on this kid. And I went back, we ate lunch together. I took my dreads down, and it was just, for him, it was almost like he was looking at someone that was a celebrity, because I think it was so out of the box for him to see someone who, like I said, looked like him, that was wearing this uniform and treating him like a human being,
Yeah, exactly.
So,
We'll save that maybe for another talking point, but I could go on and on about, I understand there needs to be dress code policy and the way you speak and interact, but for most people that you're talking to in a one-on-one setting, it's very robotic, and you need to be able to still be a human. We could talk about that, because the way you talk to people, we've talked about this, depending on where you're at or where you're at. If you try to talk like a college professor, they're going to be like, dude, get this person out of here. He's being an asshole or whatever. But if you talk to them, it's hard to articulate, because you kind of got to be in the moment, but they just want to hear you talk
right.
as who you are, not some robot, because this is how the agency expects you to be. It's like, no, I'm still a human being. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
what prompted you to go from that undercover? Or I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you, I'd been there for a couple of years. I had done all of that stuff. I ended up becoming, at the time, we had like a Black Advisory Council. So I was the liaison for the Black Advisory Council, and I'd done that for a little bit, and I wanted to get promoted. That's what it boiled down to. And they said, at this point, you need a detective experience. So I put in my memo to go to a detective unit, and I landed in what was our Star Squad at the time. So it was a squad that was created kind of like the street crimes unit or green team, you'll sometimes hear them called, but they were for the whole county. So we did a little bit of everything. We did surveillance. We did light undercover work. We did a lot of targeting individuals who were the idea was that about 5% of the people roughly do a good portion of the crime. So if we can target that 5%, we can make a real impact on the amount of crime. So we would take those individuals if there were issues, and we would surveil them. We would make.
I'm most sorry about that. You were talking about the undercover stuff and targeting individuals that were recidivist or causing most of the crime. And you mentioned that 5% of the population, or 5% of the criminal population, probably more precise, causes over 95, 96%. I think the FBI put out some stats that rings true, that it's not just all these random criminals running around. It's a very select group of criminals causing majority of the crime. But you were talking
Correct.
about that. Yeah.
That's what my unit was. We were tasked with kind of focusing on those individuals so that we could really make an impact in the overall crime picture, essentially. So I did that for a little bit. And then after it was probably about 2-year mark, they decided the Star Squad it wasn't really useful anymore. So they disbanded us, and we all had to figure out where we wanted to go. We had a couple different options. So one of the options was to go fully undercover. At the time, I thought, well, I'll try it. It's not anything that I ever had aspired to do.
Talking about not just the pills that you were working on the street, but also when I came on, it was the green dot scam, where they were basically filing taxes in other people's name. That was pretty hot and heavy when you switched to undercover.
That was the good bit of our focus. Myself and my partner, we did a lot of, I bought guns like crazy. The sheriff's office always focused on getting guns off the street. So we bought as many illegal guns as we could get. We bought dope, but the dope for us was mostly focused on pills. Don't get me wrong. We bought weed and we bought, cocaine. We bought crack sometimes, those kind of things. But pills was really a lot of what we bought during that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought people's social security numbers like crazy an amount, and people would sell me a legal tablet full of social security numbers.
Oh my God.
With the idea that I was going to be filing taxes and doing those kinds of things. So in that job, I also had a bunch of people that, subsequently we work with being an undercover detective. It's one of the few detective positions where you work the case from start to finish. A lot of our detectives are fed cases because they start out on the street, a street level deputy responds out, and then they feed them the case. Undercover, a lot of times I'm going out, I'm cold buying. Once I've done that cold buy, I then have to figure out who this person is, because usually bad guys aren't going to be like, oh, good afternoon, this is my first and last name. You got to figure out who they are off of a nickname usually, and then build your case from there, make the arrest. Sometimes you can make them a confidential informant and flip them. Other times you can't. And so you end up just taking it all the way through the court proceedings and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, I was able to learn the skill set of working with confidential informants and managing CIs is what we call them, getting them set up, how to keep them safe, because once they became a confidential informant, now they're my responsibility to make sure nothing happens to them either in the course of what we're doing. So it was very interesting. For me, it was not my cup of tea. It wasn't my ideal job, because you realize very quickly you're a bad guy. You have to be in order to do that job. You lie to everybody because you got to lie to CIs. You got to lie to your bad guys. You got to lie to make sure that you're always keeping your story straight. So it was really cumbersome for me for that reason. And that was the part I did not like, is because it was just constantly like, oh gosh, like, what did I tell this person? What did I say to this person? And I will tell you, it was kind of a crazy story. What was finally kind of my breaking point, where I was like, this is just not for me. I had a CI, and at this point, she was an unwitting CI. So she didn't know I was a cop, but she was introducing me to a lot of different people. And she called me one night in the middle of the night. She's crying. And I'm like, what's wrong? And long story short, her grandmother had gotten very sick and was being rushed to the hospital and probably was going to die. And she called me and she said, I'm calling you because you're my only friend, and I just needed somebody to be able to hear me out. And I thought, this lady doesn't even know my real name. Like, as a human being, it made me, it hurt my soul in that moment to say, this person's in one of the worst positions of their life, and they call this person that they think is a friend of theirs, and I've been doing nothing but lying to her. It's my job. It's my job, 100%. Was she doing wrong stuff? Absolutely. But we still we can't forget that we're humans under that. So for me, that was kind of like,
how long were you undercover at that point? Like for real,
I was
like deep undercover, or
it was probably coming up on the 2-year mark.
2-year mark, yeah.
Probably coming up on like the 2-year mark.
You bring up an interesting point though. How did that affect you with your not job related friends and family, and how did that change you in any way, and how you interacted with them?
From my perspective, I don't think I did. I think it really, the only thing I will say it did is it pulled me out of being able to be as engaged with my family, because like I said, you're always a bad guy. So I was, I had hours that I worked, but the bad guys didn't know I had hours. So I got called all the time. So I was always, it was a little embarrassing sometimes, because I'd be at my family's and all of a sudden my bad guy phone rings and I have to step away because I don't want my parents hear me talking or doing this role essentially that I was doing. I wasn't proud of it. And that's where I think it translated to the same situation with the lady. I wasn't proud of the fact that I was somebody that she thought was a friend and I wasn't, and I couldn't be, and I didn't want to be, don't get me wrong, but it just, as a human being, it just felt like I didn't like it. Now, the funniest part is I had a partner that I was partnered with, and he loved it. He loved being a UC. He had done it. He had worked for another agency in another state. That's what he did when he was there. When he came here, this is what he did. And he loved it. So I think that's what got me through, was literally like him being my partner got me through that time in my career, because it was just, for me, that's where I think the human side of me just didn't enjoy those parts of it. And it did make me different with my family, because I felt like I don't know that they'd be proud of this part of what I'm doing.
Yeah. And you bring up, so again, these are just good points and stuff that,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of know, but maybe not everybody knows, is that there's such a vast array of ways to enforce the law, and it takes all kinds of people. There's so many different
Mm-hmm.
crimes. I know I've had discussions because I could care less about traffic crimes, but people really care about that. And they're like, bad guys drive cars, and they love pulling over cars, or they love the buying and selling dope, getting dope off the streets or whatever it is they are.
Right.
And I don't think it makes you a bad cop if you're like, well, or even a bad person. If you're like, well, I don't really agree with that. You can still focus your interests and your skill sets on just a vast array of different types of criminality. I mean, there's white collar crimes, there's robberies, there's sexual assaults, there's things like that. Drugs obviously is always on the forefront, usually in the media and stuff, but it takes all kinds. And I think you don't know that until you start doing the job itself. I know
Right.
that when I started, I was like super into the robberies and these people crimes, but then I transitioned my interest to other things in law enforcement, because I was like, you just kind of arrest this, in my opinion, you just arrest the same people over and over again. You're like, well, am I even making an
Right.
impact? So you bring up a
Mm-hmm.
very good point, and I appreciate you sharing that. So you said that phone call where this lady felt like you were a friend, that was kind of your out point. So what did that look like when you're like, all right, I did this for a few years. I checked the box. I kind of want to get out. So what was kind of the next stage for you?
For me, I had done it because I wanted to get promoted. That's why I originally went there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is something we can get into a little bit more later, but I ended up going to my supervisor and saying, hey, I want to get promoted. I've been here for a while. You guys are, promotions are coming up. I'd like to get pushed for promotion. And I was basically told, like, yeah, that's understood. However, the reality is we already have a black female that we're going to push. So we're not going to push you this time. So that was a bit deflating at the
I can
time.
imagine. Mm-hmm.
And it didn't go well after that. So after that, I ended up kind of going through an IA situation, and the result of the IA situation, because I didn't just take it, was they moved me back to the street. And so I went back. That's where I met you guys. I ended up coming back. And at the time, up until that point, I had always worked, if I worked the street, I worked midnights. And I thought to myself, I'm going to go back and have fun. I mean, like, I have not been that happy in this role that I've been doing. So I'm going back to having fun now with this job. And I went back to working midnight patrol, and that's where I met you and BJ. And it was definitely reminiscent of my first years of being a deputy, because the squad I worked for when I first came on and being a deputy, we had so much fun. And when I came back, it wasn't necessarily the whole squad, but me, you, and BJ had so much fun out there doing our job, doing it right, being effective, because, I'm not one that says, oh, well, you can't enforce law because it's not fair. No, we enforced the law, but we had a good time. We enjoyed it. We took care of each other, all those things that I felt like had been a bit lacking.
No, well, and so we'll talk about this because it's just such a good moment for me in my personal and professional career. So BJ
Right.
and I were still relatively new. We weren't
Mm-hmm.
we weren't held in the best light for our bosses, because we were known to get into all kinds of stuff at all hours of the day. And we had a very clear mindset on how we felt we should enforce the law and what crimes that we wanted to go after. And we weren't afraid to get into
Right.
vehicle pursuits and chase people on foot. And we did all kinds of stuff, which, despite popular belief, bosses and supervisors do not like that. They don't like it
No.
because it causes paperwork, headaches, it ties up resources. That's the way
Right.
they view that type of activity. And so we were basically sent down. We were in District 1, which you brought up before as being like one of the worst districts for crime. It's just a very high population of criminals. And we were sent down
Right.
to one of the furthest away areas of District 1, known as the Fishbowl. And we were told, hey,
Yeah.
you guys are going to get a new zone partner. And all we were told is just leave her alone. She's a senior deputy. She'll do what she wants. And, give her a wide berth was what was described to us. And BJ and I looked at each other like, fuck that, man. We're going to go find you. And I would say, I don't know how many shifts you actually worked, because we were just so busy and caught up, but it probably took a few shifts, few days. I don't remember the exact length of time. And we rolled up and were like, what's up, Mo? I'm Tyler. I'm BJ. And you're like, yeah, what's up? And then, but kind of from there, we started backing each other up on calls, and you're like, you guys are crazy. And we're like, yeah, we like to have fun with it. We try to talk to people and get out and walk. And
Yeah.
you're like, what are you doing? But what did it look like
I
from
love
your
it.
side?
You know what was funny is I came back out and I did the beauty of my professional navigation that had occurred is I had had a lot of experiences that had now given me more tools in my tool belt. I had done crime prevention. I had worked undercover. I had done kind of like the countywide street crime. So I thought now I have the ability again to go back to what I really like doing, which was teaching people because I knew coming to midnights that I was going to be bumping into a lot of people who were going to be less senior than me. And so when I did meet you two, I thought, okay, well, this could be exciting. They are excited about the job still. And I want some of their excitement to bleed off on me, but I also can see some little things that I can help them with because there were times where I'd be like, y'all don't have to fight just yet. Let's try talking to them.
Yeah.
Well, hang on. Let me just try this real quick before y'all do that. Let me try this. And I think that was the beauty of our relationship. I was learning from you guys and taking in some of that excitement that had kind of probably been taken away from me because of the situation and circumstances. And then I was excited then to share with you guys how to do this job safer and different maybe than you originally were glancing at. So for me, when you guys were like, we like to walk around, I'm thinking, wow, okay, I'm down for this. Let's do it. So I thoroughly at first I didn't know how to feel you guys out. So that's why I was like, yeah, what's up? But then once I realized, okay, these are dudes that are genuine about what they're doing. And it seems like we have the same mindset still, at the core values, we have the same mindset. And so I just ran with it. And then when I started sharing with you guys a little bit to be like, hey, let's try this way. Hear me out on that. And you guys listened. I was like, this is going to be great. We're going to be really good because I can learn from them and they're willing to learn from me too.
And I think, we BJ and I talk about it all the time. And I don't know, I'm not going to say specifically just because we played sports, but I think we both have very strong opinions on what is right, what is wrong, how we want to do things. But there's something about being able to be coachable. And for me, again, personal stories is that I will argue my point. And then if you say, I hear you, but this is how we do it. For me, it's like, I'm very passionate. And then I go, oh, okay, learn something new and I keep it moving. But not only being able to listen and then reenact it, regurgitate what I'm being told. It also got me in trouble with some supervisors who were less than thrilled. Plus, BJ and I are bigger people. I'm 6'4", he's 6'2", but we're bigger dudes. And so sometimes even within law enforcement supervisors who are not that size, they feel like you're using your size to intimidate them or whatever it is. You, on the other hand, never felt that way. At least if you did, you never expressed that as an opinion. You're like, I don't give a shit because I'm here and Mo, I would go to war with you. And watching you so many times it's happened, but you would be interviewing somebody. And while technically we're there, we're learning, we're feeding off kind of how you're interviewing. Either BJ and I are one or the other, but we would stand 3 inches from the dude's side of the head or whatever and be like, if you move, I will destroy you.
That's why I said we had so much fun. And I think that it balanced us because I was, you guys are big dudes for sure. And it was, I will say I was never intimidated by that. And sidebar, it's because my dad's 6'4", my brother's 6'5".
Yeah.
That's just been normal, very normal for me. So doesn't ever intimidate me. My thing too is I never ever wanted you guys to feel like you did have to take care of me or I was a liability to you guys.
Yeah.
So I made sure that I didn't write checks that I couldn't cash or I wasn't willing to at least cash. And I made sure that I did toe the line, I felt like, with you guys. So that's why I don't think there was an intimidation factor. I definitely wanted to make sure, especially I was older than you guys. I still am. But being older than you guys, I never wanted to feel like you guys felt like, oh, we gotta take care of her. Like she's the girl, she's the old lady or any of those things. So I wanted to bring that to the table along with my wealth of knowledge because like I told you, I realized as an FTO, I love teaching people how to do this job and learn from the mistakes that I made. I will tell you, and we'll talk about this more later, but as a instructor, as a trainer, as an academy manager, all those things, I had no problem with sharing mistakes that I made so that you didn't have to make them. I would be the big sister that did all the things so that you didn't have to take all of the lashes that I did. You could just live off of my experience and say, oh, don't do that. Because remember that one time Monique told us they did so and so. So that was really like when I came back out to Midnights, that was really what I would do, was really do what happened to me when I first got hired on, mentor the people who were going to be doing this job. Because in that moment and that time, I realized I was probably 12 years in, I think, roughly. I realized that I was not going to do this forever and wanted to fulfill what it is that I came into law enforcement to do. I wanted to make sure that things were different, could make a difference. I can't do the job a kernel or a ripple effect that then radiates out. Now I can truly make a difference because I teach Tyler teaches somebody else, that person teaches someone else, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So
well,
I think
correct.
that's why I loved our time out on the street. Never anywhere I wouldn't have gone with you guys. You know, that when we special assignments, I loved assignments and different things that we did. I loved it because I knew that first of all, we were going to be safe, but we were all going to teach each other something, you know. And going back to when I would interview people and you two would stand there, funniest thing ever to see two of the biggest guys you probably will ever see in uniform, really. And they're literally breathing down someone's neck. And I'm like, no. Look at me and talk to me. If you don't do that, then we're going to have a problem. But just look at me, stay with me, answer the question. And we just had such a good, you know, like people never even complained about it. The thing, it was how we interacted with people that they didn't even complain. They were just like, okay, very well.
Yep. I'll listen. And one of the stories that we had. Yep. I got you. You back?
Yes, I'm back now.
I'll bring up one of the stories we had, Mo and I, talking about holding our own. We responded to a domestic. The father was intoxicated. And when I say intoxicated, I mean very intoxicated. And he was fighting with his two teenage sons, which were known to be affiliated with street gangs. It's not like Bloods and Crips. There's different street gangs. There's all kinds of stuff, but they were also known criminals. But there was a mom in there and there was also a young girl in there, and it was a domestic, and they were actively fighting. And so Mo and I show up and we pull the dad out and we go in because the two teen boys that were hyped up, they had their shirts off. They were ready to fight. They wanted to fight us. And so we pulled the dad out and said, stay outside. Let me go address what's inside. We'll come talk to you. Just stay right here. And he said, I got it. We go in and the two teenagers looked like they were ready to fight us. And so we're trying to talk to the mom who's upset. The little girl was crying. And next thing you know, we hear, I don't know if he broke through the glass, but he came through a window one way or another.
He came through a window.
Yeah. And the two teen boys look over and the dad just dive tackles one of the kids. And Mo was ready to go jump in. I said, whoa. And I pulled out the taser. I was like, tasers. And she's like, oh yeah. And I was like, you take the left, I'll take the right. We did a double taser. I think I ended up tasing the dad. You tased the son that was fighting. Yep. The other son stepped out of the way. And it kind of went, all hell broke loose for a minute. We ended up arresting the dad and the son that were fighting for domestic. And then I think the other son, we ended up having a Baker Act because he was just losing his mind. Yeah. And the mom was crying. But yeah, no, Mo, there was, like I said, I would go to war.
I'll tell you, I love that story because on an average day, I was always the one that'd be like, Tyler, let's not fight. But that particular day, I don't know why, that one struck a nerve with me. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And you were like, Mo, calm down. And it was like the final, it's like the, what is it? Like the teacher is now being taught by the student. Cause you were like, calm down. Taser, what are we doing? I was like, oh, you're right.
And then I'll bring up another one because again, these are just moments that stood out. But you lived in an area that you were living there, but you were also guarding. It was like a state park or community park or something like that. But you would get trespassers, people going in the woods doing God only knows what, whatever that is they're doing. And you would get calls like, hey, there's somebody in the woods. And I remember I was getting off shift, and I think BJ and I both were getting off shift. And as I'm getting to my house, I hear you go on the radio, and BJ and I both, all of us, that's right. And you go on the radio with a trespasser, and BJ and I turned around, still in uniform, lights and siren to go back you up. And I think at the time, your husband who was also in law enforcement, was there, but he was in like a white, he was going to bed. So he was in like a white undershirt and like, shorts or something. He's running down, we're pulling up, and in the meantime, you've got these two individuals not fully dressed. Let's just phrase it that way. Nope. I think one of them had elephant underwear on, for people who know what that is. Correct. And we just jumped out hot. And that was one of those moments where you were like, it's all good. I got him. And I took the one you were talking to, and I just stood next to him, and BJ had the other one, and like, don't you move. And we just, and then Frank was like, are you good? I was like, we got it. He's like, okay. And he just kind of, because he was ready to obviously back you as well, but that's what it was like. Yeah. Go ahead. I'll let you tell you because you were the one on it.
Well, that was huge because I mean, like you said, just to give it kind of a picture, I lived on a county park, but it was like 1,500 acres, and it wasn't like a park with like, play set and things like that. It was 1,500 acres of biking and trails and things like that. It was woods essentially. And these individuals, as I'm driving home, there's a car parked in this dark area of the park. I have to pull over there. And these individuals, in the middle of me running the tag, emerged from the woods. So it's me in the middle of the woods with these two people, one of them wearing elephant underwear. So I get on the radio so that somebody knows where I'm at, because the way it would look if they were to look at our mapping system, it would look like I was home, because that's where I lived essentially. So I get on the radio, and that's the thing. Like I had such a good working relationship with you guys, and I loved it, that I didn't have to say, send me a backup. You guys could tell by the tone in my voice. Hey, and I didn't even ask for backup. And here I knew y'all were like, put me on it. And I want to say you guys were actually logged off and came up on your unit numbers because you were done for the night technically. So, and my husband, like you said, at the time, he wasn't my husband. He was my fiance, but he would never have left me with someone. But you guys, he knew. He's like, she's good. They got her. So it was great. It was absolutely great. And I will tell you on a note where one time where me and you were on a call, and I don't know if you remember this one, but I remember we got a call. Actually, day shift, they got the call originally, or someone else on the day shift, they got the call originally at an apartment complex in one of our really bad areas about some lady screaming for help in her apartment. Mm-hmm. And so me and you got dispatched out on this call a second time. And every time we would go there, we were getting no answer at the door. Well, this time when me and you went there, we investigated a little further, and the neighbors said there is someone in that apartment. She has been screaming for help for a couple hours, and we're concerned. So we did our due diligence, talked to several neighbors. Come to find out, there was somebody in there. We found out on the back end, but the neighbors were like, there's someone in there. We're pretty sure it's a male and a female. We're pretty sure that the woman is being held against her will, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, after we did several ways of trying to call in and trying to do all these things, we got approval to kick the door in. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because it was just me and you. And I thought in a lot of cases, I would not have hit a door with just one other person, that I wouldn't have done it. But I knew how me and you operated, and I felt confident in our skill set that we would be okay. And lo and behold, you kicked the door in. I did not. And we ended up going in, and there was a girl being held against her will. And the husband, I want to say her boyfriend, he had a knife, I believe, to her throat or to some part of her body. And when we went in, guns drawn, we were able to get her out. I'm pretty sure you grabbed him by some part of his body, and he got slung around like the Hulk did in the Avengers movie. Mm-hmm. And we were able to, make a good arrest and be safe about it. So it's just like, you talk about having people that you trust to that level, because I think people think that in law enforcement, trusting your zone partners is innate. It's not. It is something that comes with building a relationship with that person and understanding how they operate. And that's the opportunity I got with you and BJ. So
no, absolutely. And I don't remember the exact nature of the call, but you just reminded me. There was another call, and sometimes you get calls and it's with people who just want to be kind of assholes to cops or whatever it is. You're not investigating it the way they want you to. But there was this lady who said that her ex-boyfriend stole something. It was something along those lines. And she started getting an attitude with you and I, to the point that I started like looking around, and we had done this enough times that you did the same thing. We're like looking under chairs and couches, and she's like, what are you guys looking for? And I can't remember if it was you and me, but we were like, we're trying to see who you're talking to, because I know you're not talking to me like that. We're here to help you. Like, we kept it together, but after that call, I remember we were dying laughing, and we were telling PJ about it. Trying to see who you're talking to like that.
Yeah, that's why I said we just had a good time because we talked to people like real humans.
I had you on for a little over an hour, and I want to be respectful for your time, and I appreciate it. I just kind of want to tie into what have you been doing post your career, and what does that look like for you with your family and the law enforcement string and experience that you had?
Sure. So after I ended up going back to the street, I subsequently, I did things backwards. I always tell people. So I had a long career and then I got pregnant and I had my son. And with what I had done in this job, I did not, if we could afford it, want to put him in daycare and keep running and gunning. I realized right away when I got pregnant, I was going to be a different cop. And I felt like I needed to shift into a different role. So prior to me, like I said, I've kind of always, I realized I had a bug for training. And I subsequently, after I became a field training officer, I went and got certified to be an instructor. So I had been teaching for a number of years at our agency, as well as at one of the community colleges, at the academies. I taught firearms. I taught general instruction type stuff. So that was really kind of something I enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
So once I had my son and I decided that I was not going to stay in law enforcement, I had really dumped a lot of my eggs into being a trainer and being an instructor because I still, again, thought that is where you can really make that ripple effect. So I had started teaching pretty hard and heavy once I left. I also ended up I moved to a neighboring county. So I don't live in the county anymore that we lived in. And in that neighboring county, they also had a training center. I started teaching at that training center prior to leaving law enforcement. And I liked the way they ran their program. I enjoyed, again, the teaching aspect. So I did a lot of the firearms teaching at that college. I did a ton of the in-classroom stuff. So my focus has always been communication and really wanting to teach people those kind of things. I think it's one of those things that where I can teach you how to shoot, I can teach you how to fight, I can teach you how to drive. But what you're going to do every single day as a cop in your career is talk to people. So I loved when they didn't have anybody who I thought I don't think they were happy with a lot of the people that were teaching communication. It was kind of just going through the motions. And I think I was one of the few instructors that really jumped into that with a wanting to approach it with a level of excellence and making sure these kids came out with a skill set because get on my soapbox for a minute. A lot of the people who are now going into law enforcement have little communication skills because they are growing up in an era where they can do chat GPT. They can be on Facebook. They can have, Instagram. They have Facebook friends and people that they are on Instagram with, but they don't actually have real interactions with real people. They Instacart their food. They pay for their gas at the pump. They never talk to people. So that was one of the things that I was pretty passionate about. So I jumped into doing a lot of teaching on that in that aspect of communication. I did a lot of the teaching for the serving special populations, whether it be teaching them how do you deal with people who are homeless different? How do you deal with people who are drug addicts different? How do you deal with someone with mental health illnesses? Because that's something that we deal with regularly. And I really focused on trying to take the information that the Florida Department of Law Enforcement provides us as instructors and building it out and showing them how it's really applicable in their real world usage. Because the book stuff doesn't take me long to teach them, but showing them how you take that book stuff and overlay it on real world situations is what I like to do with them. So I did a lot of that. I taught legal. I taught report writing because that was always something I was pretty strong in and did a lot of those things. Once I started teaching a lot, the training center, I assume they liked me a lot because they started doing some things different. I ended up being certified as a defensive tactics instructor and I got certified as a driving instructor. So I taught driving, defensive tactics. I've been teaching firearms and then of course all of the general instruction. So I was doing that on a very small scale. And then, like you stated, my husband was also in law enforcement and he retired about a year and a half after I left. So I started teaching more because I knew my son could stay at home with his dad and I felt more comfortable with that. So that's really was my focus for the first probably 5 years after I left the sheriff's office. It was solely focused on being an instructor and teaching the next generation of law enforcement officers what really matters. About 5 years after that, they created the college here in the county where I'm at, and it was a manager position for the entire academy. So I managed the law enforcement, the corrections academy. I was overseeing all of the the instructors that we had, which was 100 plus instructors that we had on the books, to make sure that they were staying, all of their certificates and their certifications were in compliance with the state. I also oversaw all of our advanced and specialized training, and then our facilities, like our fire. We had an actual gun range at our college, and we have a driving pad. So kind of overseeing all of those things. And it was definitely a shift because it moved me out of the classroom. But what it allowed me to do is the thing that I've always liked to do. I then started mentoring new instructors that were going to be going out there and now teaching, and trying to get into their heads to make them not just think about just deliver the information, but how can I deliver it and engage the student? How can I teach these people that what you're reading in the book, that how to take that and overlay it, like I said, over these real world situations. And the thing I used to always tell them is, remember, you're not teaching people. I can't teach you a checklist of how to be a cop. If that was, then we would all walk around with a book and it'd be like, step one, tell the person to do this. And I said, but it's not that way. We are teaching them how to think, because these situations are going to be ever evolving. So we are giving them tools in their tool belt that they can think through, looking at the situation. What tools do I need to reach in there and grab? Whether it be interpretation of law, whether it be communication, whether it be dealing with a mental health issue, or, writing a report. We're teaching them how to think through whatever that situation is that's in front of them on how to do it. So that is what I did up until a little while back. And then I've recently, I took a step down from that position just because I left the sheriff's office so I could focus on my son and rearing him and making sure that he grows up to be the man that I would like him to be and what me and my husband morally think he should be. And so that job was just taking out a little too much of my time when it came to it. So I've recently taken a step back and I've gone back to just being an instructor. But I say just being, I still think that you make such an impact when I'm in the classroom and I'm talking to these students and I'm engaging them. And I am one of those people that I will play a video that is not something that they want to watch, that challenges their way of thinking, because I think as a cop, you have to be open to the evolution of the way you interpret situations, because if you get stuck in your ways, you are never going to be a good cop, ever. So that's always my goal as an instructor, is to teach them how to evolve their way of thinking at all times.
Exactly. And so you tied it in well, because this is definitely not the last episode. Just for everyone who's listening, there's additional episodes that are being worked on, going over training. There's so much. You outlined it perfectly, and kind of what it takes to be in law enforcement. And you can't teach all these things in a 4-month academy, an 8-month academy. It doesn't matter. And FTO, you have to continue this as a profession. But also, I'm very excited because we're going to try to do a 2-part series on mental health within law enforcement itself, not just dealing with mental health on the streets, but the mental health that law enforcement officers deal with on a regular basis. So I'm excited about those. I'm teasing them a little bit, but we are working through that. So Mo, anything you want to wrap up with? I appreciate your time. So we've got more to discuss on future episodes.
I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to kind of talk about this, because it is needed for those in law enforcement as well as those who aren't in law enforcement.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. This was another episode of Street Tales. And again, Mo, looking forward to talking to you in the future. Thank you so much.